Let me just start by saying that it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today. So welcome everybody to the Diversity Lunch. I'm here joined by my colleague Ajamal, and we are going to talk to you about non-code contributions as a road to diversity and inclusion. Let me also just point out that we have 2 microphones in the room, so at the end of our presentation, we are going to take some questions if you want to continue the discussions.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. And my name is Ayjamal Nurmamatkazi. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, and I'm a program manager, and I contribute to a couple of open source projects, and I'm a committer in one of them, which is Apache Airflow, as was mentioned before. And in these communities, I advocate for documentation and recognition of non-code contributions. And the other thing that I really care about is diversity and inclusion in tech.
That's fantastic. And I'm Joana Carrasqueira. I'm also a program manager in open source, and I deeply care about the health of our communities in every single way. As it was mentioned, I'm a pharmacist by training, so I care about the well-being and to make sure that our communities are healthy and strong and empowered. So we've been talking about non-code contributions. Let's start by understanding what non-code contributions really are. So non-code contributions are all the types of contributions that don't involve code in open source. We can define them by all the actions that we can take in order to advance project management, our communities, and all those that care about the user and contributed experience. So, as you can see, we have these 3 main pillars in terms of non-contributions, and they very often overlap within each other. So some of the examples, just to give you some perspective into what are we really talking about. When we think about the user support, we think about improving documentation, training, providing the tools that support our contributors, building the use cases for the different technologies, but also working on communication, which can go from working on social media to blog posts to press releases as a whole array of different types of communications. In terms of community management, when we think about our communities, all the contributions that can go from helping organizing meetups and community-oriented events, recognizing those that contribute to open source, but also we are talking about mentorship and providing fundraising opportunities to help advancing our communities. At a project level, this can go from working on new releases, Jira triage, but also working on the project's roadmap. So now that we have defined non-code contributions, let's have a deep look into what diversity and inclusion really mean. So the terms diversity and inclusion are very often thrown around. And my colleagues and I, we really like this definition by Jess Mitchell, because it says that diversity is a number, inclusion, a process, and equity is the outcome. And this quote is just so powerful because we know that many of our open source communities, they are very diverse. But I challenge you, are they truly inclusive? Sometimes we don't know. And unfortunately, the contributor base is very different from the user base in open source. So let's have a look at those numbers to see what we are talking about. When we think about the general population, and now I'm thinking about gender imbalances, let's assume that all the individuals that form all the general population identify either as a man, as a male, or as a female. But at the same time, let's acknowledge that all these individuals don't sum up to 100%. When we narrowed it down and look at the professional programmers into this segment, only 23% are women. So it is a massive decrease that we see from the overall population. And then, when we look at it open source, what do you think that this number really is? Do you think that you can help us here, Ajamal?
Yeah, I can help you with the number there. That's 3%. That's 3% of the respondents to the GitHub survey in 117 were female, 95 were male, and only 1 was non-binary. So, and that's a problem of open source. Like when our communities are not inclusive, when women and underrepresented minorities don't feel safe and welcome in our communities, we lose a lot. Like we lose a lot of skills and expertise and experience that they could bring to our projects. And when we consider that increasingly a track record of contributing to open source is a requirement to get hired in tech, it has potential to make the representation of women and underrepresented minorities even worse in proprietary software. So, at Google, open source strategy team, they wanted to understand more about attracting new contributors to open source. They commissioned a study to help us better understand why and how people do or do not contribute to open source. So the goals were to understand who the users that approach our communities and projects, how they go from just being a user to contributor, and what kind of support the project maintainers can give them in order to foster healthy processes. And we hope to find answer to all of those questions, and we wanted to provide agnostic guidelines and document the best practices open source. And we started the process by interviewing stakeholders at Google, like who were like software engineers, tech leads, technical writers, program managers, who were involved in open source. And we were looking to understand the challenges they had bringing new users and contributors to their projects. And with these discussions, we wanted to understand what would be our research goal and how the research would benefit open source projects. And after those discussions, we selected 18 subjects. We tried to be as random and be inclusive in our selection process, and they all came from different backgrounds and different experiences. And we were asking them questions of how they choose a project for adoption. And when they use it, do they contribute back? And if they don't contribute back, what are the reasons and what are the barriers they face? And from ours, and after that, we collected all their stories, we mapped them, and performed thematic analysis to come up with these user archetypes in open source. Originally, there were 5. The 5th one is not included here because those are lurkers and they don't interact with our project much, and we don't know about them a lot, but the rest is here. The first one is leader, who is very active in open source. He's active voice in their local communities. They collaborate with other leaders, and they also provide a lot of mentorship, attend these conferences, give talks. Then there's convinced personas, who is convinced that the contribution to open source is very valuable, but they don't have enough support from their employers. That's why they can't contribute a lot. And there's competent persona who is very competent. He has a lot of skills, and he contributes code, mostly bug fixes, and he thinks that's the only way of contributing to open source. And finally, meet Parker. She's a curious persona who is curious about open source, but they don't know anything about it yet. So today, I'm going to talk a lot about curious because that's where everyone starts. I was Parker very recently, and here I am, a little bit confident, a little bit convinced. Anyway, so what she's curious about? She's curious about open source. She would like to use open source for her work, but she faces barriers. She's unfamiliar how the processes are. She doesn't understand open source licenses, and she might not even be familiar with GitHub or like how to file issues, how to submit fixes. But as I said, she loves the idea of open source, and she would love to contribute back someday. And because she's not an engineer, let's say she's a data analyst, she's not convinced whether she can bring anything of value. And she might be even nervous, like asking questions and interacting in the community because English is not her first language. It might not be even her second spoken language. And she might even have some bad experiences, like of getting harassed in the web previously. So she needs all the support that you can give her from the very beginning, like just telling what open source is about, showing her how the GitHub PRs are filed. And she needs all that support from you. So let's go look at Parker's journey of how she becomes a user of open source. So how does she pick a project? There are a million projects and libraries available out there, and how does she choose the right one? She starts looking into available options, and once she finds one project that looks promising, she does a quick assessment for fit. Will it work with her team and her environment? Like, she looks at the platform compatibility, the languages used, and the environment. She wants to be able to quickly sift out the projects that she fundamentally cannot adopt for any technical reasons. And if the project passes her first sniff test, she needs to understand the project better. Like, she needs to see whether it's healthy and well-maintained. She does this by checking GitHub stats, like how many starts and downloads it have, like how recent the releases, commits, or how many issues are being created versus resolved. And she does quick overview of documentation, whether like they exist in case she needs them. And only once she is sure that the project is healthy and the community is active, Parker starts digging into the code itself. She needs to create a map of the code and its pieces and figure out if it's a good fit for her use case. And she wants help getting up and running really fast by doing quick start, looking at tutorials, and reading the documentation. And at this stage, it's very important for your resources, like documentation and tutorials, to be out there, very accessible, findable, understandable, for her to get onboarded quickly to the project. But also, before adopting any open source software, she wants to make sure that there won't be any legal complications. So she searches for the docs that she can, let's say, pass on to her legal team for assessment, or some, yeah. And after that, like after she's able to answer all of these questions, she's ready to adopt the technology. She starts using it, and she's very excited about it because it's free, and it gets her job done, and she's having fun. And as she keeps using the technology, she might run into a problem. Like, it can be a bug, or it can be any other implementation issues. And then she starts searching the docs for specific answers, and she goes to other support channels like Stack Overflow to find the answer. And after doing quite a bit of research, she finds a solution, and she's excited about it. Like, she has an idea how to fix it. Let's say she can write 2 lines of documentation that would help all other users in the future not to run into the same problem over and over again. And that's a trigger for her to contribute back. At this stage, Parker is adapting the project. She's making it better with just 2 lines of documentation. And she's happy about it because she knows that it would be so helpful and everybody else would benefit from it. And it would save a lot of time for future users not to run into the same problem or solve the same problem very quickly. But she has never created PR, as we mentioned before, right? She never used GitHub. So that's a barrier for her. And she needs to figure out how it's done, and it takes a lot of time. And let's imagine she goes to her boss and she says, hey, I want to work on this. And they say, like, hey, we're not paying for you to work on free software. And that's another barrier, she doesn't have time. But then there are other questions that start kicking in. what if my idea isn't good enough? What if people laugh at me? What if they call me stupid and like they rip apart my suggestion? And Parker may even go to the dev list and user list to check how similar contributions were handled in the past. If there were some toxic behaviors, or if documentation contributions never got attention from reviewers, or if other non-code contributions, they never got recognized in the community, she might have second thoughts of contributing back, right? Because the act of contributing is very vulnerable. It exposes, and it's stressful, and it requires a lot of courage and effort and time. So, and if Parker decides not to contribute back to the project, everyone loses. First, Parker loses a chance to become a member of an awesome open source community and grow there and become a leader. The project loses because she never submits her change. And of course, even her employer loses because they lose the chance of telling everyone else and their customers that they're very active in open source communities. And it's a very sad story if she doesn't contribute back. So how can we change it? How can we ensure that she contributes and feels safe in the community? Joanna?
That is actually a great question. And Parker's example is a great example on how we can miss out on the opportunity of having a new contributor providing new contributions to our projects. So how can we attract and retain these contributors? That is the main question. I may have a few answers, but I would love to hear from your perspectives after this session. And one of them is to recognize early. No contribution is too small. And I'm going to say it again because it is so critically important. No contribution is too small. And recognize early, because the chances of having your contributors sticking around and continuing improving your project over time are higher when you recognize them early in their open source journey, but also over time. So therefore, reward consistently and over time. People feel more engaged, more motivated, and they will stick around with your project. And therefore, also, by doing these two steps, you'll be able to build an empowered network of like-minded individuals who will continue supporting each other throughout their open source journey. This journey sometimes can be very lonely, but by being together, we are stronger together as well. So what are the outcomes that we can all get by having these empowered networks and communities? There are primarily two outcomes that I believe that we can gain from supporting our communities. The first one is development agility. Our projects become more agile, more effective, and therefore everybody wins. And that goes in line with ecosystem growth. When one wins, we all win in open source. And therefore, companies also benefit by having these diverse, empowered networks of communities. Only a few takeaways that I would like you to take from this presentation today. And the first one is nurture your community. Care for your people. Diversity of experiences and perspectives is so important in open source, and that's what makes our projects stronger. Non-code contributions, they add value to our projects in so many ways, like we mentioned with these examples before. So therefore, we must create, and I challenge you to create the infrastructure and the tools and support systems to recognize and identify these non-code contributions. Because again, no contribution is too small. Recognize early, reward consistently, and build empowered networks. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we really appreciate your time, and we would like to open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you don't have any questions, we will also now work around the room while you all have lunch, and I hope that you continue enjoying the session. We happen to have one, in fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Can you
Hello.
hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
So I just wanted to thank everyone here. I am part of the Diversity Scholarship Program, and
Welcome.
I wanted to say This is my first time at this conference, and I have never met a more welcoming, smart group of people who are willing to share their knowledge. And as somebody who is, I have a background in technology, but I've always been afraid to learn to code. And I think that the culture that's being created here is really, really important for that, because as a patient advocate, I know that we need to kind of spread that knowledge to other communities who don't have it. So I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody here, and you guys are doing a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comment. I think that it's safe to say that both Ajamal and I absolutely agree with that. We also have very different education and cultural backgrounds, and it's fantastic to see that in a safe space we can all learn and grow together and share our opinions and experiences. So thank you so much for organizing such a beautiful conference. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the light is hitting my face. I can't see.
It's fine. So I run community at my company, and that includes both discussion forums, but also code contributions. And I'm trying to get more contributions from people in other countries besides the US, and also hopefully way more women. And one of the things that I find myself running into is that in a lot of communities, there's a culture where there's almost a sense of pride in pulling ideas apart to the extreme. So when you made the comment about being torn down or feeling really vulnerable, it can be difficult to dismantle that culture when that's one of the organizing principles that people derive status from and take pride in. And I'm wondering if there have been things that emerged in your research on the user journey with options to replace that. Like if you take away a post from a building, you have to put something else in to hold it up. So what are some ways to reinforce that sense of community that don't involve being elitist and don't involve, snark? And is there anything that you found that people respond to in its place that you were kind of able to recommend?
I mean, yeah, that's a question that we get quite often, and it's a very hard and complicated process. And we didn't go that far of how they were able to remove those people with toxic behaviors and things like that. But from the experience, I can tell that because I contribute to Apache projects, they have very clear code of conduct, and every time someone is behaving and offending someone else, there's always someone who comes out and tells, well, you're doing the wrong thing. And you need to have leaders like that to come and, yes, enforce those good actions and behaviors in the community. And if it's unfortunate if everyone, the people who have the voice are all like that, it's absolutely unfortunate, and I don't think those kind of projects can survive long term. But I really recommend for any project to have very clear code of conduct, and they're some of them, they're all already out there. You can always adapt them and to be applicable to a project. I hope that answers your questions, but yeah, we can talk more once I'm there.
Absolutely. That was a great answer. By having a code of conduct, we are all responsible for the health and the culture and environment of our communities, aren't we? So it comes down to what kind of culture do we want to promote and support in our communities. And by having and reinforcing a code of conduct that we can all feel comfortable with and that we are building a safe space, we all gain by that. So really trying to understand what are the differences, recognizing code and non-code contributions, and also reinforcing a code of conduct. That could be definitely some of the ways to go.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to be mindful of time. I think we're way over time.
I have something very quick to say,
Okay.
just to add. I wanted to make sure everyone noticed on their table that there are posters and stickers and postcards for I Am Remarkable. And if you're not familiar with I Am Remarkable, definitely check it out and take the stickers, do whatever you want with them. But this is another way to help people from any background, any gender, whatever you want, to become more confident in speaking up for yourself and talking about your accomplishments. So as you're doing coding, as you're doing anything in your professional life or your personal life, you can take these skills and speak with more confidence and tell people what you've accomplished. So check out the I Am Remarkable thing and bring it to your company, bring it to your community, because it's something that will really drive those conversations in a much more productive way that we've seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a very cool program. I'm Remarkable. I haven't done it, but I recommend to everyone.
But we will. We will. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, and see you around.